Let's get into the question of, do red flag laws work, and are they enough? Joining me now, one of the country's leading experts in mental health and mass violence research. His name, Jeffrey Swanson. He's a professor of psychiatry and behavioral science at Duke University School of Medicine. Dr. Swanson also studies causes of gun violence and ways to reduce it. Dr. Swanson, thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me on.
So, red flag laws have been around since 1999, Connecticut being the first state. Florida, I believe, among the most recent, given what they did after Parkland. Every study I've said says there appears to be modest improvement, at least in the prevention of suicides. What else have we seen with red flag laws over the last 20 years?
Well, that's the main thing. I mean, you know, what you have is, if you think about how this works, it's a time-limited, civil court-ordered, a tool to remove guns from people who pose a risk to themselves or others. Now, this could be, this needle in a haystack, aggrieved young man who's amassing a small arsenal, but it's just way more likely that it's going to be somebody's young adult son, or maybe your granddad who's,
right,
bereaved or, drinking heavily and has all these guns. And so, if you, in most states in that situation, there's nothing you can do unless your granddad, has a criminal record or has been involuntarily committed or is incompetent in one of these states that has an extreme risk protection order law. You can reach out to law enforcement, and they can look into it. And if there's probable cause, they can go ahead and get this expedited order. There's, due process baked into the front end. They can take the guns away. It's not criminalizing. And because there are so many people like that, and particularly because people like that very often do not have any gun disqualifying record, it's a really good opportunity to save lives. So it's really hard. It's not that we don't, it's not that it couldn't work to stop mass shootings. That's why we're talking about it. But it's a really hard thing to study, and we're going to need more evidence for that. But, if gun suicides are, 2/3 of the gun deaths, that's a good enough reason. We've got pretty good evidence that, from Connecticut and Indiana, that for every 10 to 20 of these gun removal actions, one life is saved.
So this is great on suicide prevention, but there is no evidence that this does anything on the mass violence front. Is that fair to say?
I would say what we have is anecdotal evidence that's kind of percolating up from some of the states that have enacted these in recent years, or recent months actually. And so you'll have stories about here was a person who intended maybe to carry out a shooting, and the ERPO process identified that person. That's not the same as having scientific evidence from a big study.
Sure.
So we have that kind of thing. And I would say if we enacted these laws in all states and really scaled them up, logically, the more firearms are removed from dangerous people, the more likely it's going to be that one of those people, would be someone who might be about to carry out a mass shooting, and, you would prevent that. You're not going to hear that. There's not going to be a big, you're not going to have a show on what did not happen today. But if we really did over time have a reduction, in this nightmare of mass shootings, which is very complex, then why would it matter how it's happening?
Let me ask you this about the background checks system that we have now, and even the various proposals that would try to close loopholes in various ways. The basic background check, is it tough enough as it is? Should there be some attempt at testing a mental state of somebody?
Well, I think there are lots of problems with the background check system as it is. Because we have so many guns and they're constitutionally protected, what we have to do is to try to identify risky people who are, pose such a risk that it's justified to limit their Second Amendment right. We're stuck right now with the rules we've had for a long time, dating back to the 1968 Gun Control Act. So that would be on the mental health side, involuntary civil commitment, or somebody with a felony record, a few other things. But the problem with that is that is too broad and too narrow at the same time. There are lots of people who are prohibited from guns, maybe because they had a mental involuntary commitment 25 years ago. They don't pose a risk to anybody now. Meanwhile, there are tons of people out there, right. Impulsive, angry, people with a short fuse who are carrying guns, and they're not prohibited. We could have a perfect background check system, and they would pass it. So we need better criteria at the point of sale. We also need, the data to actually be in there, because the database is only as good as the records that are there.
You do this research. You're trying to do this research to see if there's the correlation between mental health and mass violence. But you're limited, as you say. Is there data the government could be providing that you could improve your research that right now they're not providing? And as we know the government has been very hesitant to allow gun research to go forward.
Yeah, it's been tough, for people in the field of gun violence prevention research to get funding from the government, because of the issue with the CDC. I mean, right now there's no legal impediment or, order that says that the CDC can't fund research on the causes and consequences of gun violence. The problem is getting the money appropriated to do that. Right. We do a lot of research where what we try to do is go into a state and match records over time from a lot of different agencies. So we could say, let's take a sample of people who are in the public behavioral health system and let's match their records going forward, death records and arrest records, and try to do some kind of quasi-experimental analysis. Because, if you're looking for rare events, you need a lot of data. And that's complicated to do. I mean, the regulatory, hurdles you have to go through are daunting. But that's one way to do it, and we just have to stick with it, because we need to build evidence for things that work over time, and then basically put things into place and have this conversation between evidence-based policy and policy-informed research so that we improve as we go along.
Evidence-based policy and policy-informed research, politics. It would be so nice to have. Dr. Swanson, perhaps you'll get that government funding sooner rather than later so that we can get some definitive, scientifically based evidence here. Dr. Swanson, thank you for your work. Thank you for your expertise. And thanks for coming on. Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel. So thank you. Now do me a favor. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Meet the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.